Hey, welcome to the inaugural video of this channel where we will begin by looking at Paul's letter to the Galatians. Welcome to Sneaky Greeky. I'm Jonathan, and this is a channel dedicated to those who love Greek, are learning Greek, already know Greek, just have some interest in the Greek language, which is broad and incorporates more than biblical Greek, of course, which is Koine Greek. And we will be looking at that general period Hellenistic Greek, but also classical Greek, and particularly Attic Greek, and be reading several different pieces throughout these different periods. The point of this channel really is to admire the Greek text, to enjoy it. And I thought, what better way to do that than to start with something that I love, which is the biblical text, and look at Paul's letter to the Galatians. So these videos will be paragraph by paragraph rather than verse by verse. We will look at, a chunk, a pericope, a section of scripture, and walk through it. So, welcome. I'm glad you're a part of it. I look forward to your contributions. If you know Greek, and you should feel free to jump on the YouTube channel and comment underneath the video. Would love to have your insight and participation, and appreciate if you would like this channel, share it, subscribe to it, and feel free to invite others that you think would be interested also in this. So let's begin in Galatians chapter 1, where I will read this text and then we will begin to discuss it. And for those who don't know Greek, I will translate, and certainly we will talk about the meaning of this passage, and not strictly just talk about Greek grammar, though that will be the focus. I do think it'd be a very rich study as well for those of you who don't know Greek but just love the biblical text and want to go deeper. So for you, this is, I think, a great opportunity as well. Welcome. Glad you're a part of it as well. So let's read the text, Galatians chapter 1, beginning in verse 1. Pavlos apostolos uk ap anthropon, ude dia anthropu, ala dia Jesu Christu, ke tiu patras tu e gerontas efton ek necron. Ke isin imi pantas adelphi tes ecclesiaes tes Galatias, charis himin ke arene apateu patras, imon ke coriu Jesu Christu. Tu dontos iafton iperton amartion imon, hopos excelete himas ek tu aionios tu enestotos poneru, kata to telema tu teu ke patras imon. Hohe daxa es tu aionios ton aionion. Amen. Well, when beginning to look at a Greek text, what I like to do is to get a general survey of what we're looking at. So zoom out, try to understand what is it that we're actually dealing with. And we know that we're dealing here with Paul's greeting, his salutation, his introduction to the letter. And so we're going to have some familiar material. Paul, in typical Pauline style, his greetings have a lot of similar elements, and here is no different. But what's neat is that Pauline style, though it has a lot of similarities, each book that he writes has some variations, and it's neat to see some of those nuances, and we definitely see some of them here at the beginning of Galatians. But the other thing I like to do is just looking at the Greek text is observe, what is it that we're looking at here? Uh, and just identifying the parts of speech. And so let's just kind of survey verse 1 and just kind of see kind of what we're looking at. We have a noun. Uh, we have a noun. We have a noun. We have, we have a negative particle. We have a preposition. We have a noun. We have another negative particle. We have a preposition. We have a noun. We have a conjunction, an adversative conjunction. We have another preposition. We have a noun. We have a conjunction, a connective. We have a noun, and we have a participle. This is an article. We'll put it a definite article. And actually, this is a participle. And We have a pronoun, we have a preposition, and we have a noun. So it's good just to kind of get an idea. And what you observe when you first look at this verse is, well, there's no verb. So either a verb needs to be supplied because it's ellipted, that is, it's not there, and we will supply it, or, we just sort of work with it as it is, if you will. Um, so what I like to do when I'm looking at a Greek text is not only that, but I like to bracket. So, as we look at this structure, we're going to see a couple of negative particles here. That's going to stand out to me immediately. We're also going to look at the prepositional phrases, and I like to bracket those off as well, just to get a sense as to what we're modifying, the modifiers that are here. I'd like to make an emphasis here of the fact that we have a strong adversative, which we'll get to in a minute. We have another prepositional phrase here, separated by a connective, and then a noun phrase here, which is going to be a participle carrying over into this direct object. And when we have a prepositional phrase here. The only other thing to mention here in terms of the structure is we have this in apposition. So Paul equals the apostle, and the apostle equals Paul. Okay, so that's kind of the lay of the land, so that we have a sense as to kind of where we're going. It's helpful to kind of map this out. Now, eventually, after you read Greek for a long time, you just kind of you don't do this. You I mean, you do it. You're just doing it intuitively. You map this out in your head, but it's good to develop a discipline early on of kind of mapping sentences like this, so that you get a sense as to kind of what you're dealing with and what you're working with in a particular text. Because when you get especially into more complex Greek structure, you're going to end up having embedded sentences within sentences, and embedded sentences within embedded sentences within matrix sentences. And they're going to be long and verbose. And if you don't have a sense as to where you're going, what the matrix verb is, and what the constituent parts are, how that passage, that paragraph, that pericope is fitting together, you'll just get lost. And so it is good, and I encourage especially students early on to kind of map their way through the text like this, to get a sense, so that eventually this becomes, as I said, intuitive, and you just kind of begin to do that natively. Okay, so that's where we're going. Really a great intro here in the book of Galatians. So let's just translate. So Paul, an apostle, not from men, nor through a man, but through Jesus Christ and God the Father, who raised him from the dead. So we start off with Pavlos Apostolos, and we have a nominative author, which is Paul, and then in apposition, he describes himself as the apostle. So as I already said, we put this equal sign here. Paul is the apostle, and the apostle is Paul. Now, apostolos is used by Jesus in Luke 6:13 in Luke 6:13 to describe the 12 disciples. But in other places in the New Testament, it's also applied to just people who are carrying out a mission in the proclamation of the gospel. And so you see that in Acts chapter 14, verse 4. And if you want to look at that later, you can, or now even. Romans 16:7 is another example of where you see that. And so Paul is concerned here with this designation of calling himself an apostle. You say, well, why is he so concerned? Why does he want to start off his letter with letting everybody know he's an apostolos? And presumably Paul is concerned about this because the churches in Galatia were seeking to attack or undermine his authority. And Paul understands this, and he wants to correct that. His apostolic authority ends up being one of the most important themes in Galatians. And so he takes time to affirm this from the outset and says that his apostleship, not only is he an apostle, but he wants to say two things about his apostleship. One, it's not from men, and notice this is plural, nor is it through a man, and this is singular. And so Paul is letting us know two negatives right away. I'm an apostle, but I need you to understand that my apostleship is not from men. It's not from of men, nor is it through a man as if it was through some kind of human agency. And then we're going to have a strong adversative here, which we'll get to in a minute, where he's going to say it's not these two things negatively, but positively, it is this. My apostleship is through Jesus Christ and God the Father, which we'll get to in just a minute. So, this is so, but he starts here with his first negative particle, which is uk, and he says not from man, and we can read this as a this from man phrase, this prepositional phrase, as a I think a genitive of source. In other words, the source of my apostleship is not from man. This is not where it comes from. Um, and he states it negatively. It was not from men, and again, this is plural. But he also says, but I want to add to that and say it's also oude dia anthropou. It's not through uh, a man. And again, we have a singular here. So we have one plural and one singular. And here I think the shift is really just from source. The source of my apostleship is not from men, from human beings, from people, nor is it through a man. And I think the focus of this prepositional phrase is more along the lines of agency. So Paul is saying the agent from which my apostolic mission came from is not through a man, and so he negates that as well. And the stress is that Paul's mission is from a totally different source and a different agency, and that's why this word Allah is so important. Is that Paul is setting up an aversive, contrastative piece of syntax here to let us know it's not this, but positively it is something else. And so let me just say a word about Allah. It's a very common adversative in Greek, in Paul, in really just Greek in general. And Paul uses it more than 20 times in Galatians itself to highlight contrast. It's a not this, but that kind of setup. What Allah does is it introduces a strong contrast. And if you read Runge's discourse grammar on the New Testament, Runge actually talks about Allah, and he talks about it as used as what he calls a point counterpoint set. And so the point of the adversative particle is to indicate a difference with or a contrast to what precedes. So let me erase all this. So we're going to start here and say that everything that follows here is going to be fundamentally different from this whole section right here. And this is the negative section, and this is the positive section. And so you have a point and a counterpoint set. And quite often you see, you see it follow this Allah followed by a negative clause in introducing a positive alternative. And it's important to note that, if the conjunction is preceded by a negative clause, which in this case it is, in fact, there's two examples of it here, then the antithesis between the first thing, which is this section, and the second thing, which is down here, the antithesis is sharp. There's a sharp distinction between this part and the other part, and it's as if in fact, if you read a very interesting piece from Jacob Heckert, in his discourse function of co-joiners and pastoral epistles. Jacob Heckert says that what's happening here is an incorrect expectation is canceled and a proper expectation is put in place. In other words, the negative, the incorrect expectation is that somehow Paul's apostleship was tied to man, when it's not tied to man at all. Paul's apostleship is not that. It's not through human agency. It's not from men. But Paul's apostleship is tied to this. It's through the agency of Jesus Christ and God the Father. That's where his apostleship comes from. Now, why did I take time on all of that? Well, in part because, you know, I think it's important to patiently unpack the role that, each particle, each conjunction plays in the text, because it ends up paying great dividends for us exegetically. And it also respects the text with the type of care and precision that the writers exercised in communicating their intended message. And so, for me, it's really important to slow down and understand, what it is that we're actually reading here. So, in summary, Paul is saying his commission and authority is not from men, nor is it through a man, but it is via Jesu Christou ke Theopatros tu egerontas evtonek necron. It is through Jesus Christ and God the Father. And then, of course, we're going to modify God the Father in just a second with the rest of this phrase down here. But before we get to there, via Jesu Christou ke Theopatros. Again, what we see here is agency. We saw agency here with through Jesus Christ and God the Father, and this agency is pointing us to where his apostolic mission actually came from. It's coming and we see two persons of the Trinity here, Jesus and God the Father. That is where his apostolic authority, that's where his apostolic appointment is coming from. And he's setting this up as a way of contrast to the negated agency in the prepositional phrase where we see right above here, via anthropou. It's not via anthropou, it's via Jesu Christou. Okay? And so his apostleship is not from men nor through man, but it's in fact through Jesus Christ and God the Father. Paul is saying, let's be really clear on the source of my apostleship. And here, we notice patros, father, that, it's in apposition to God. So again, like we saw with Pavlos apostolos here, we see the same thing here. It's through Jesus Christ and God who is the Father, and the Father is God. These are in apposition to one another. And so we see patros here as a genitive singular, and theou as a genitive, masculine genitive, singular. And so, and another thing to point out here is that via here, this preposition, in a sense, we could say it's doing double duty in via Jesu Christou ke theou patros, such that via is implied before theou patros. In other words, you could supply another dia here, and that's really what Paul's intending. Paul, an apostle, not from men nor through a man, but through Jesus Christ and through, right here, God the Father. Okay, so, and then he's going to modify, who is this, who is God the Father? Well, God the Father, let's further modify that with a participle, and we're gonna look right here, and we're gonna say this God the Father is, we're gonna use an aorist active participle, a masculine aorist active participle, and a gerontos just comes from agero, which means to raise up. So this Father is the one who raised him. This is the direct object, and it's a direct referral back to Jesus, who raised him, a prepositional phrase, ek nekron, from the dead ones, plural, from among the dead, from the realm of the dead. That's where God the Father raised him from the dead. And so this is his way of explaining, further explaining who uh, God is. He is to a gerontos. The participle could either be here a substantival participle, uh, or this could also, which is in apposition to theopatros. In other words, God the Father, we could put another equal sign, namely the one who raised him from the dead. We could see it that way. And I think substantival makes good sense here with the head nouns theopatros. You just have to remember that theu and two are following the second declension patterns, while patros and agerontos are following third declension patterns. And so just review those forms. Make sure you're fresh on those forms. But agero is the root word for this participle, and agero is a verb often used in the New Testament, which just means to wake from sleep. But at its pinnacle, it means to awaken from the dead, to rise up from the dead. And the idea is resurrection. And that could be physical. So we have, like, for example, Matthew 10, verse 8, you see an example of a gero, which is used physically, raising from the dead. But also spiritually, we see it. So, for example, in 2 Corinthians 1 9, we're going to see an example of this idea of a gero functioning as being raised from the dead spiritually. Um, but the idea here is that Paul is wanting to let us know, again, that his apostleship, um, it doesn't come from men. In fact, it comes from Jesus. And not just Jesus, but God the Father, and not just God the Father, but the type of Father who raised Jesus from the dead. In other words, that's pretty big time stuff. is is the import of all of that coming together. Um, One thing that just kind of strikes me as I'm looking at this text is when I'm looking at a gerontos is here's a morphological question. Why is this an aorist? And this is an aorist participle. Um, why is this an aorist participle? Just have you think about that just for a minute. This is an aorist active participle, masculine singular genitive. Why? Why is this an aorist? Well, one letter here tips us off, and it's the alpha, because this is a liquid stem verb, agero, and the third principal part of agero is, if I can draw with this pen well enough for it to be visible, is agera, is agera, and agera is this is a third principal part. So the inside guts of the stem, ger, this inside guts of the stem is the same as the first principal part. The only thing that changes is the alpha as the connecting vowel. So this is your tip off that we're dealing with an aorist. So this is an aorist participle, and it's in attributive position. Notice the article that goes along with this participle. So it is directly modifying the Father. So this is the way we would read it: God the Father, and as a modifier, who is this Father? It's the one who raises raises things, and in this case, the one who raised Jesus from among the dead, or from the realm of the dead. It's very interesting that he uses a plural there, and not just said he raised him from the dead, singular, um, from among dead ones. There is uh, uh, something unique and interesting about that. We smooth that out in our English gloss just to say something like he, raised him from the dead. But the emphasis here is being raised up out of and away from the realm of the dead. The Galatians, let's just talk, I mean, just for a minute, theologically, we're turning back the clock in salvation history, if you will, by submitting to circumcision and the Mosaic law. But this is what's happening in Galatians. But since Jesus has been raised from the dead, since this has happened, believers are no longer under the Mosaic covenant. Now, I mean, so you think about what's actually happening here. There's a lot of discussion as well here. Just to mention this, between are we supposed to make something here of the change of participle? So it's interesting up here when he says that his apostleship is not from men, plural, but then he doesn't use apa again. He uses via. Why would he switch prepositions when he says he's not from men, nor is it through, and he wants to use a different preposition, through a man? And I think that, my best understanding of this is sort of more of a source idea. It's not, his apostleship is not sourced in men, and his apostleship is not through the agency uh, of a man. And so, very similar ideas. And I just think it's, probably not worth spending a lot of time on trying to parse out if there's something significant about this shift of prepositions there. You don't have to try to make something of everything. In fact, sometimes you get yourself into trouble when you're really trying to push the text like that and try to make it say something when this is just normal writing style. It's not that everything has to have to make some, significant exegetical point out of everything that's there. So I will pick up in our next episode, verse 2 of Galatians 1 1 through 5, and we'll discuss what Paul has to say next.